Okay.
And California has it tonight. You might know there's such a woo-woo subject.
Hi, Carol.
Yeah.
Our longtime friend.
Not from California so far.
We had somebody come in from Dubai once.
Yeah.
Where else? New Zealand?
I've got quite a few followers in New Zealand and Australia, so we'll see. The trouble is it's the wrong time of the night for them.
Yes,
exactly. Oh, no, sorry, it's Europe. No, it's Europe that's having the trouble. They're all fast asleep in London and Paris. And exactly. No, Australia could be good, could work. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Californians get it. That's what Betsy says.
And Jerry's with us. That's good. I'll mute myself for a second. But as soon as you kick.
Okay. So I'm gonna start in about a minute, just so you guys know. And as more people will come in, it takes a while for people to come in, but I do want to start on time. So I'll give it one more minute. How's that? And people will continue to join. Hi, Lorraine. Sarah, that's Connecticut you're calling in from? So somebody from the East Coast, yay, representing. Carol, it's on Sunday. Okay, so I think it's 5:01, so I'm going to go ahead and start, even though people are still coming in, but I do want to make sure that we're on time. So welcome, good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening. But just if you're new here and you don't know who FMBR is, I just want to let you know, my name is Judy Kitt. I'm the president of the Foundation for Mind Being Research, which we call FMBR. I want to let you know we were founded 42 years ago now. We're coming up on our 42nd anniversary. In 1980, we were founded by scientists and healers and artists who were interested in exploring human consciousness. And through that lens of science and wisdom traditions and spirituality and where those all meet. We're looking to provide resources to help individuals explore, discover, and apply wisdom so that they can live with a greater sense of peace and understanding and awareness. I encourage you to check us out at fmbr.org. And you can see all of our past presentations on our YouTube channel. On YouTube, it's called FMBR TV. So you can check those out. And if you want to subscribe, then you'll get notifications about when we're going live. So we're really honored to have Dr. Keith Scott Mumby with us this evening. Dr. Scott Mumby has been a world leader in alternative medicine and a professor of nutrition for nearly 40 years, with extensive connections in Europe. Over the last 30 years or more, he's been in the public eye via TV on BBC and radio and press media. He made his name internationally as the world's #1 allergy detective in the field of food and environmental allergies. In the late 70s and early 80s, he was an early pioneer in showing the immense impact of these phenomena on general health. He's a consummate blogger and the author of several books, which I can recommend, having read many of them. Now, in the before times, Dr. Scott Mumby presented to us in Palo Alto in person, and I was looking back. It was almost exactly 9 years ago when he spoke to us about the origins of being and reality. So, Keith, good evening and welcome back to us in our new format. We're glad to have you here.
It's wonderful, Judy, isn't it? Technology is marvelous. It's moved on so much.
It is.
When I was a kid, you read these science fiction stories and people would have little things in their hand that would speak distant. You could see an image and we thought, wow, that's, 50, maybe 200 years before we get there. And now we've got them. It's just amazing that you look like you're in the room almost.
Yeah, exactly. So this evening you're talking to us about the complex of self.
Well, shall I share my screen and get going? We're going to
Absolutely.
take a deep, deep dive. Listen, there are three enormous philosophic principles that nobody can quite get their head around. The three biggies are truth. What is truth? You can have a man in the room says, I can see a little green man by the fire. And the other 50 people say, there's nobody there. It doesn't mean they're right. He's wrong. He might have the only perceptual pathway. So everybody agrees is hardly a definition of truth. So in other words, what on earth is truth? We don't know. The other one is reality. What's that? What does it mean to be real? We're more and more now accustomed to the idea that nothing we see and touch is actually real. It's a quantum mechanics phenomenon of possibilities and probabilities. And the third one, of course, is being. What does it mean actually to be? So let's take a deep dive into that one, shall we? Yeah. And I'm going to talk, as you said, about the complex of self, or cloud consciousness. Now then, let's kick off from slide one. It doesn't matter what we call it. It's the idea that we're multiples. We're not single entities. Now, we all actually, well, not all, but most people think that because that's their kind of day-to-day experience. But it's extraordinary how many people can see beyond that. And there's more to us than just simply a single viewpoint. To prove this complex of self, or the cloud of beings and cells idea, I'm going to have to demolish the brain myth. So I think that's going to be a great place to start. The Orthodox science says, oh, it can't be that because, we're a brain. Everybody knows we're a brain. And of course, I don't buy into that. Anyway, let's start with what I consider a beautiful quote to do with integrity and self and love. Goethe, the German equivalent of Shakespeare, wrote this, and I love it. Bring forth what you know is true, write it so that it's clear, and then defend it to your last breath. Now, I'm not sure Goethe meant, die defending it. He just meant keep going as long as you're alive. Maybe, sorry, I just knocked my microphone. That was a shocking bang, and I apologize. Anyway, let's take a look at something, everyone knows that Wittgenstein is the real complex philosophy. It's like a language you can't understand, but once in a while there's a little spin of truth in there you can understand. And he said this, look, the solution to the riddle of life in space-time doesn't lie in space. It lies outside space-time. So we can't solve all our positional problems from here in the reality. We've got to accept stepping up and moving outside of that. Now, as I said, the proposition I'm going to establish is that we are not a single conscious entity or unity. I know a lot of people believe this. A lot of people, it's a shocking idea, and they say, well, I've never heard that before. So let's take it step by step, because I don't know exactly who's on the call, and there might be someone who's never looked at this idea before. If it's new to you, like I said, strap yourself in. You're in for a bit of a wild ride. But my friend, well, he's the late friend now, Samuel Sagan, an MD, he said, we're not just one identity, we're a mob. He's French, but he picked up on the American vernacular, let's put it that way. Ernest Hilgard, a very serious psychiatrist, psychological researcher in Germany, he came up with this idea too. I mean, you have to talk to people, listen, look, consider the evidence, and you very quickly come to the idea that there's more than one person going on in a you or in a him or her. There's something else going on. He also gave us this term co-consciousness. Now, I don't know how many of you know the work of Dick Schwartz. He invented internal family systems. And what he meant by that, he didn't mean sort of family systems in the Virginia Satir sense. He meant, inside you, the psychic self, there's this whole complex family with different identities, different parts. Dick doesn't go as far as saying these are other non-material entities, they're not parts of the brain. I do. I say it's got nothing to do with the brain, and I've got tons of evidence in this talk to prove what I'm saying, so we'll have some fun. Now, listen, Buddha knew about this. He talked of the fleas, and cleaning off the fleas out of your psychic space. And to be honest, you know, you have to do that to get any degree of clarity and purity. It's not a new idea, as I said, Buddha, but if we go back to the early Christian Gnostics, Gnosticism is I mean, they were attacked and hammered and eventually destroyed, but the basis of Gnosticism is that the world's horrible, it's evil, and everything is corrupt and coming in to destroy you, and you've got to fight to push it back. It's not a very positive or empowering philosophy. Nevertheless, the Cathars that we, you know, in southern France and Spain that we all loved, and they were wiped out in the 12th century, they were Gnostics in principle anyway. Anyway, here's a couple of quotes. Valentinus was an early Gnostic. For many spirits dwell in the body and do not permit it to be pure. Each of them brings to fruition its own works, and they treat it abusively by means of unseemly desires. Well, you can tell that's a Christian point of view, can't you? But listen, Basilides is my man. Basilides was yay close to being a pope, an early pope. So we nearly had a pope that believed we're all the mob. And, you know, I mean, listen, this was in Latin, so you have to accept the translations. I don't know who did them, but he said something along the lines of the man and the body on the self preserves the appearance of a wooden horse, according to the old, you know, Homeric myth, embracing as he does in one body a host of such different spirits. So, like I said, it's not a new idea, even if it's a bit radical or shocking or new for some of us. What about our old friend Gurdjieff, George Gurdjieff? He started out, I mean, he had a whole complex philosophy, but built on a very simple idea that we lack a single unified consciousness. He talked a lot about multiple eyes. This was the fourth way, his famous fourth way. You were to spot these other eyes and sort of pick them off. It's horribly difficult. So there aren't many fans of Gurdjieff, but he's hugely famous, as you know, and he's much loved for his spiky quotes. And one of the best quotes attributed to Gurdjieff was actually by his pupil, Peter Uspensky. He said, "The greatest barrier to conscious is the belief that one's already conscious." Oh, no, you ain't. You only think you are. But listen, if you start listening to language and accept this model or look for this model, you can hear all sorts of clues going on. People will say things, you know, like I'm of two minds. You know, what does that mean? You have two minds. A little voice inside my head tells me that, you know, whatever, or I'm conflicted on this, like there's two parts of the self. Something seemed to take over. I'm going to talk about serial killers and rapists a bit later on, but they all share a story, and I'm sympathetic. You know, they do say something just seemed to take over, and I couldn't stop it. Like this, you know, the quote beyond, although that's not from a serial killer. You know, I have no control. I watched what happens, but I just can't stop it. It comes on at me. Or I found myself crying uncontrollably and sucking my thumb, but can't explain why. It's like this other person in the body is crying and sad, but I'm not. What's the matter with you? And, you know, I've seen in my career many times a patient crying their eyes out and saying, "Oh, it's all right, I'm fine, really, no, I'm happy. It's just that I can't stop boo-hoo." And they don't know why. Well, you know, this model would explain why. And people even don't respond to their own name or respond to some other name that's not familiar. Most of what happens in these multiples of self is that the body identity is clear. You know, this is Keith Scott Mumby, or it's Judy Kitt, or it's that person. But that doesn't mean the same being is necessarily driving the vehicle, you know. Okay, so there's two things I'm going to establish. One, a proposition of consciousness that I think is important. I hold it to be true in my, you know, like Faust said, and I will defend it to my last breath, that consciousness probably came first. Now, reductionist science said it couldn't have. You know, there were no brains, there was nothing, there were no computers, nothing could be conscious. How could they be conscious? What nonsense. But actually, that's just psychopathological science. It's just opinion, baloney, if you want the ordinary word. There's no evidence for any such claim or reasoning. They just say it. It has to be inside a structure. And we say different. And quantum physics, by the way, is on our side. It's saying information is higher than physical reality. So the old model, we're all brought up with information's in a book. So you need a physical, and there's the information in the book. And then we've gone digital in this day and age. It's in the computer, it's in the bits and the bytes. But actually what quantum science is teaching us, and I just want to say this quickly because it's not what I'm talking about, but goes a step higher. Information is superior to the physical. And I've had a saying for 40 years that information implies consciousness. I won't put it any stronger than that. Let's just leave it at that for this talk. But think about it. Information, what does that mean? You need some kind of conscious entity to make anything out of information, really. Anyway, my proposition of being number 2, and I'm going to work on this with you guys, because we're going to love this, right? There's all sorts of hoo-ha that surround it. We are not a brain, absolutely not. And I'll bring some evidence forth. Reductionist science says, of course we are. Everything's driven from the brain. All our thoughts, emotions, beliefs, behaviors, everything comes from the brain. Brain-based being is a myth. I've come up with this term, brain-based being, or B3. That's that kind of modern vernacular, isn't it? A4M, B3. Anyway, B3, brain-based being. And I could add the word baloney in there, I guess, and get B4, brain-based being, baloney. Anyway, I didn't. So now consider why it's. Have I missed a slide? No, I haven't. Sorry, that was the second slide. Yeah. Consider some of the evidence. First of all, I wonder if you've had, and you have to tell me, Judy, because I can't see it. I've got a full screen, but put in chat if you have had a clear out-of-body experience. And let's see how many have. I've had quite a few. And I can tell you the most striking thing is that you can see, you can hear, you can think. Your body may be down the road, but here's you. I'm here and I can see things and I can hear things. So the first thing that tells you is you don't need sense organs, sight or any other kind of sense organ. You have a sensorium as an out-of-body being. So instantly that one and only thing tells you we're not a brain, because the brain's over there and you're over here seeing and thinking and appreciating what's going on. However, there are lots of other clues, things like telepathy and pre-science, all these good things that we all love in FNBR. We know them to be true. The experience of the majority of us is one or the other has happened to us. So we know that we're not a brain-based thinking entity, that we are in fact some kind of non-material spiritual presence with the power to be aware, self-aware, which is consciousness, and we can make decisions and things. I threw shamanic journeying in. It's not a common model we use in the West, although the so-called primitive peoples, they're damn good at it. They're not that primitive, right? They can do some remarkable things. Now, my definition of shamanic journeying that means anything is they can do all these wonderful journeys into other space and other dimensions, but you've got to produce a change in the here and now. Otherwise, it's just cheating. So, I'll give you an example I used in one of my books from a friend of mine, baby with esophageal atresia. That means the esophagus is obstructed, no food is going to go through. This was very evident in utero. My friend did a shamanic journey, did a bit of fooling around with the cells. And within a week, the esophagus had opened patently. That's what I mean by shamanic journeying. It has to happen in this reality, not just so, otherwise you could just make up stories, couldn't you? Morphogenetic fields and 100 monkeys effect. We all know about that, but these are all based on non-material phenomena, that something's going on out there. Other people can dial in or download and connect with it, but it has nothing to do with the brain's connections. And in fact, you could say all of these things are just not compatible with the brain model. They stick with it to the death, but the best scientific rigor that they can come up with is, well, it can't be true, therefore it isn't. And we run into this constantly in science, and everybody in FNBR knows it and is frustrated by it. The idiots don't seem to get it. There's another whole story out there. Okay, now if this is true, if this multiple being or identity model is true, it's going to shed light on a lot of things. Now, let's start, for example, with hearing voices. People used to consider that the definition of schizophrenia. You know, the person's mad, there are multiple personalities. And there's no question, if you're deeply into this manifestation, it's very terrifying for the patients for two reasons. One is they can't stop it. The other is they're told it's false. It's a dementia. It's a hallucination. You're wrong. Now, if somebody backed off and said, well, no, I don't think so. I hear voices too. What's the matter with that? You know, I have conversations sometimes. You could probably heal quite a few suffering psychiatric cases anyway. I'll go a little bit more into that later, but let's just say that the phenomena of hearing voices, and by the way, I don't just mean, you know, you come up with another good new idea and put it into words. I mean, it's a clear, distinct voice ringing in your psychic space. Somebody said, and, you know, there've been amazing stories. You know, don't get on the plane, Simon. And so Simon was scared, didn't get on the plane, which later crashed. You know, there are many stories like this. So it wraps all sorts of things in non-materiality, hallucinogenic voices, and a bit of prescience as well. But look, I think a lot of us certainly know about this phenomenon of entities, you know, that people, they can move, walk-ins, we call them sometimes, don't we? If you're in a bad place or especially traumatized, an entity that's different to you can walk in, what we call a walk-in. Now, I'd like to say something about near-death experiences too, or not so much the near-death phenomena, but when a person dies or is said to have died and then suddenly recovers, there's often a dramatic change in personality. I know one that was a lovely university professor, had a coronary, passed out, and was, you know, eventually was revived. But ever after, his person was so extreme. He was a gangster that started drug running and shooting people and pistols in the Caribbean. It was the most total dramatic change. And of course, the doctors would just say, no, it was some brain damage, you know, lack of oxygen. Baloney. I'm pretty clear what happened because, you know, I knew him before and I knew him afterwards, and he was a very different person. I would say, I'm free to say it could be, whereas they're stuck. They haven't got any possible explanation. So, but anyway, possession, walk-ins, things like that. Now, what about multiple personality disorder? I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that. I don't think it's even a disorder. But there are people that are clearly manifesting several different personalities. And, you know, sometimes, Judy, this can be really fascinating and extreme. In one personality, the person is, say, allergic to bees. If they get stung, they need their EpiPen or it's off to ER. But if they're in the other personality, they can get stung by half a dozen bees, nothing happens. They really are personality transformations. And, you know, we know the power of mind. So, you know, if you're in a mental state where you don't think you're allergic to bees, you're not going to be allergic to bees. If you're in a mental state where you think you are and you're frightened of them, it's very likely to go wrong for you if you do get stung. Now, schizophrenia, I've used as an example. It used to be called split personality. It's often not like that, but it's an extreme detachment from reality. And to be honest, anything could happen. I had a boy once who was allergic to cheese. And I found out, so it was a food allergy. He was schizophrenic, but he was fine if he stayed off cheese. And if he ate cheese, you know, and when we gave him the food test, he went off with the fairies. You know, he's having conversations with Jesus Christ and Dylan Thomas, and, who were not there, of course, and he'd hardly say. But 4 days later, he evacuated the bowel, all the cheese gone, and recovered as normal as you and me. So certainly one of the manifestations of the extreme dissociation is a personality disorder, and that's really what it's about. Now, I did mention serial killers, and it's a very common story, which, let's just say, I'm not excusing them, but let's just say it makes more sense if you understand this context. And if you go and read, I mean, the last interview of Ted Bundy, for example, a famous American serial killer, it's posted online. You can go and read it. And he's very clear that something took over. He couldn't understand. And of course, everybody said, oh, he's just making excuses to try and get out of the death penalty. But actually, he was not going to get out of the death penalty. It was 2 days later, and it was going to happen. That was that. But he talked frankly about what his experience had been. And this thing took over, was very different from him. A bit like Basilides and Valentinus were saying, they took over, used the body for their gratification, and then, handed it back in a bit of a state, as it were. So many things can become clearer and easy to understand and easier to correct in this model. So I think it's a very valuable model. Now, remember, this step is basically trashing the idea of a brain. So let's move on with that. There was a very famous experiment conducted in the late 1940s by Carl Lashley. I think he was at Princeton. Don't quote me, I can't remember that. But he famously cut up rat brains to see where them, once he cut a certain part out and the memory went, he'd know, haha, the brain was in that bit. The only unfortunate thing for his experiment is he cut out the entire brain and the rats still remembered how to get round the maze and things like that. So they, the Orthodox or the reductionists say, well, he proved therefore that memory was diffuse. It must be. Well, I say he proved that memory is not stored in the brain, period. And again, back to out of bodies. How many people have confessed to an out of body, Judy? Do we know? A few or one or none?
Yeah, there were at least 6 or 7 there.
Right. Could you ask them? I'll carry on, but give me the answer in a minute. How many of you could remember what was happening when you're out of body and remember things that had already happened to you before you went out of body? And I think you'll find the majority, when they question themselves, will realize, well, actually, they had their memory intact too. They could remember on Thursday they were supposed to be going to so-and-so, but let's see what they say. Okay. Don't want to preempt it. Anyway, this was the essay was called, you can see at the bottom here, it's called In Search of the Engram. The engram was the idea of a physical trace on cells. But this is the best evidence of all, right? I'm going to introduce you to the late Professor John Lauber. Sadly, he died. He was a professor at a university in Sheffield, England, that was not very far from where I went to medical school. I was just across the mountains in Manchester. But he had 300 cases with no brain. Wow. Now, when I say no brain, I mean less than 2%. Some of them had less than 1%. It was just kind of a smidge around the inside of the skull. It's actually a condition called hydrocephalus, or water on the brain. And what happens is that pressure builds up and it crushes the brain until gradually it disappeared. But guess what? Nobody could tell. No different. The people had the same memories, the same personalities, same emotions. They loved the same people for the same reasons. There was a student at that same university who had an IQ of 126 and got a first-class honors degree with no brain. I mean, you've got to question this brain stuff. I'm not saying it's of no use. We'll come to that in a minute. But, to say we are a brain or we're being a brain just doesn't stack up against this evidence, right? Virtually no brain. Well, of course, the shills get in there and try and criticize everything. They said, oh, well, what do you mean by virtual? Well, the answer is less than 1%, you idiots, and it still didn't show. Here's a picture. This is a Frenchman, right? An article in the Lancet, another medical journal, 2007, the case of a Frenchman who lived a pretty normal life, and yet over 90% of his brain was gone. That's what this big black space is in the center of the skull there. It's water. It's liquid, fluid anyway, mostly water. It's called hydrocephalus, or water brain, or water on the brain, if you like. And here's a killer quote at the bottom by I've forgotten Axel Clemence. Any theory of consciousness has to be able to explain why a person like that who's missing 90% of his neurons still exhibits normal behavior. Well, of course, you have to be able to include that. But science says, oh, well, it was probably fake, or it was a mistake, or we only used 5% of our brains, so clearly, the other 5% expanded. It's all hogwash. It does not stack up. And by the way, this myth that we only use 10% of our brains is a complete and total myth. This is the day and age of functional MRI scans. And you can see if you use your right brain, the whole brain lights up. If you use your left brain, the whole brain lights up. It's just nonsense that we're not using much of our brains. We're using all of it all the time. Okay, so let's look at the Orthodox counter-argument. Well, I'm not going to dwell on why they're wrong, but we'll give them some force, right? First of all, they're saying a non-material substance or flux or some force could not possibly initiate action in a material system. In other words, if our thinking entity is a non-material entity, how can we tell the body to raise my right arm? It's not possible. Well, who says? Again, it's this psychopathological side. They just make it up. Where did it come from? There's no law of physics that says a non-material system cannot make a cause a reaction or entrain an effect inside the physical. It's just nonsense. They just make it up. Why not? I say it can happen and does. Period. Oh, I keep hitting the microphone. I do apologize. Now, here there's another argument. I'll just deal with two. The common one is, if the brain is not the source of our, thinking and being, how is it that, brain damage affects things? Or, if you take a drug, you go weird and woo-woo. So it's obviously affecting the brain, and that makes it proves that the brain is the seat of thought and consciousness. Well, I say nuts to that. Let's take it on. All right. I think a lot of us know the radio model. If the brain is like a radio, you can tune in and you can hear some music. Okay. Does that mean there are musicians inside your brain? No. The musicians could be many miles away playing in a studio. Something is being transmitted and the brain is tuning into it. That's all it means. The brain is a decoder and a tuner from which we can interconnect with things. So people at a distance, or thoughts and ideas, we can tune into them, and that gives them a physical apparency. But they didn't come from there any more than the music in the radio came from the radio. The musicians are not in the radio. Actually, I prefer the cell phone model in this day and age. We've all got one, right? If you take it out and have a look. And reflect on what I'm going to say next, which is you can call somebody anywhere in the world. You can call a friend in Sydney, Tokyo, New York, San Francisco. Does that mean the person you're calling is inside the phone? Of course it doesn't. But that's what these idiot reductionist scientists are saying. Oh no, it's in the phone. That person's voice is coming from the phone. And they cling to this like it's a death model, but I think you can see the stupidity of it anyway. So the counter arguments there, attempts to disprove the non-material mind model, just simply don't stack up. It's as simple as that. All right, so quod erat demonstrandum. We're not a brain. I just realized I didn't finish that slide. I'll do it later. Let's go back to this model anyway of multiple selves. There is an executive self. There are what I call other selves, and then there are what I call non-self others. Now that should be self-explanatory. There's clearly beings that are close in on us and have probably been with us for, well, all our lives. If you believe in past lives, they might have been with us for thousands of years. So we've formed a sort of semi-welded network that have shared so many experiences. We kind of think alike, and probably would blow off ones that didn't think alike anyway. They'd have a hard time and leave. But then there are lots of non-self others. What I'm talking about here is discarnate beings. And there are clouds of them. Anyone who can perceive these things. I mean, it's not just ghosts and dead people. What was that Bruce Willis movie? The Sixth Sense, wasn't it? Where he had this gift of seeing dead people, or the kid did, sorry, the child had the gift of seeing dead people. My wife can do that to a degree, not that magic. But most people who are perceptive and aware can pick up cells, entities, beings, thought centers. Some of them are, I call them consciousness particles. They're kind of small and don't seem to have much of a life of their own. But look, here's the killer question at the bottom. If one non-material form can influence the body, why not dozens? Why not hundreds, thousands? We could be totally open out there. Maybe, it's a conscious effort to keep it closed down so that we don't get overwhelmed and confused. But, nobody has the ownership of a body. You know, it's not like you've got to have the right ticket before you come in. If you're a non-material entity, you can influence a body. It's just that if the one that's there considers it to be the person, then it's got more control than you have and would probably shut you out. Anyway, that's the basis of the model. Okay, so we'll talk about that. And that's part of another model. Like, these are just models. Okay, if you don't want to believe them, don't believe them. You know, you can believe any model. You do the Christian model, the brain is everything model. I don't mind, but I'm just sharing with you a model that's got very persuasive evidence. Persuasive partly that the wrong view just can't be true, but also persuasive that this one is very likely true. So let me introduce you to what I call jokingly the glass elevator to God, right? You know what a glass elevator is. You go and take a ride upstairs. You can always see down, but it's not so easy to see up what's going on. And it's different floors. So let's take a look at this glass elevator ride, then you'll see the purpose, you know, see what the point is and where I'm going with this. All right, ground floor is what we call the creature. That's the animal in us. Nobody can argue, you know, bang, bang, you know, I'm a biological entity, body, whatever non-material things hanging around. I'm a biological being, an animal, a creature, in other words. And I'd like to, for those of you not heard of this idea of the mix-up between, I think this is one of the major missing keys in psychology and psychiatry, is the failure to understand that the creature and the spirit are different, or the conscious entity, if you don't like the word spirit. They're different. They're doing different things. The creature has a job to do. It wants to survive. So its major emotion is fear. The non-material entity can't die. So why should it be? You know, it doesn't feel any fear at all. Why should it? You know, no matter, no energy, no space, no time. That's non-material. No time means, well, it means what it says. There's no time. It goes on forever. There's no end. So it's very powerful, but the two get into conflict. And most people don't seem to understand that, and especially not doctors and psychiatrists, who should do better. They should know better. So we get this sad story, you know, of some priest, a Catholic priest, who, you know, starts having sex with a woman, may run off with her, or he may come to a very bad end while lying within the, all a bad story. But that's just his creature getting mixed up with his spirit self. He made promises to God as the spirit self, but he finds that he can't keep them because the creature keeps pushing him until he goes nuts, okay? So it's kind of a tangle, and Melvin Connor, MD, wrote this book called The Tangled Wing, and I highly recommend it. It's very much about what I'm talking about, the confusion between spirit and physical self. Okay, now over the years, I've added, I mean, I started doing this glass elevator model about 30 years ago, but I've now added a new floor, second floor. Here I'm putting neural networks. Now, I don't know how many of you know, I hope most of all of you know what these are, but these are emerging as a kind of conscious awareness. You can, you know, rewire the brain and plasticity. You probably read all about that. But, you know, did you know that electronic devices can be part of neural networks? You know, this iPhone for sure is a neural network, or a network, but it's got what I've called organismic, not orgasmic, organismic qualities. But a neural network is a self-reflexing, self-organizing network. It can learn and grow. So something happens, it puts it into the algorithm of self. And then if something else happens, it adds that. So they grow and learn exactly as your smartphone does. You know, it soon learns that you like to go and see, you know, the news in French, or you like to go and see pictures of semi-dressed girls. It'll soon learn and start, you know, if you're looking for a greenhouse, the next thing you know is ads coming everywhere about greenhouses. You know, it's learned about you, it's learned from what you do. So it is definitely a neural network in character. It grows in an organic way. The question I'm going to leave hanging is, to what extent are smartphones part of our consciousness? You know, in this day and age, they're certainly part of our memory. You know, you don't remember anything anymore. You put in your phone and 12 hours later it goes, ding-a-ling, remember to call Mary. So it's very much part of ourself, I suppose, but that doesn't mean it has conscious awareness. Anyway, isn't that a fascinating possible concept, because we know more and more people dive into their cell phones. It's like they live in their cell phones. They're walking along the street, walking through traffic, almost bumping into people, just living in their phone. I mean, literally in their phone. Wow. All right, so we got a third floor: mind, thought, memory, awareness, emotions, all that thinking stuff. Now, a lot of this, like Gurdjieff said, is just semi-automatic. It's subconscious. It's going on at an unconscious level. You don't have any vote in it at all. And certainly some parts of it, I've got to say this as an MD, some of it's, is brain-based. It's physical. For example, talk to any woman about, say, PMS, premenstrual syndrome. She'll tell you hormones make you feel differently. By the way, I have a joke. A lot of men suffer from PMS. Did you know that? If you think it through, it's more than a joke. A lot of guys suffer from PMS, sadly. But deficiencies, drugs, these are all capable of altering brain function, as we know. So you get a different output. It doesn't mean the non-material self has changed necessarily, because we're using the brain now as an interface between up there and down here. Okay, anyway, the point is the average individual very rarely rises above this level, like Gurdjieff was saying, that the idea of the illusion of being conscious and aware. It is, because you're thinking, it doesn't mean you're aware of what you're thinking, or you're thinking about what you're thinking. Gurdjieff, and he talked about, what was it, not mindfulness, self-remembering was his expression for watching yourself. We got mindfulness, where you try and observe yourself. But I have a saying that says it loud and clear, which is to see yourself being yourself. So you can be out there and up there, look down and see yourself being yourself. You often get very different perceptions of awareness and different solutions to the problems, of course, because you're not a down there creature, you're an up here spirit being that can probably see quite clearly what to do. But the fool that's down there hasn't got it yet. You've got to patiently wait until he does. Okay, fourth floor, the executive self. That's the sort of me, the real I. This is where those terms are. Anyway, self-remembering and mindful, or witnessing somebody. Was witnessing Gurdjieff, actually. I mean, I got those back to the front. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That we're all talking about seeing yourself, being yourself, as I put here on the fourth line. It's a glass elevator model, so you can look down, but it's not so easy to look up. But this is the first really spiritual level. And it's not just, feeling you're looking at yourself, or pretending you are, or giving yourself the illusion. It's clear, in my view, that you are actually higher looking down. Where you're so used to thinking of the brain, you tell yourself that the brain is creating the illusion of looking at yourself. And I hope by the end of this talk, if not already, you'll realize that you are up there looking down on yourself. The brain illusion has got nothing to do with it. Anyway, so then we come to the exciting level, fifth floor, the complex of self, or what I've often called cloud consciousness in my writings. And as I said, we divide these things into other selves and then non-self others. The non-self others are not so close in, but that doesn't mean they're not capable of influencing you. As I said, out there are clouds of these beings, discarnate beings, we call them, right? Why would they not influence our thought and actions? It's actually quite unreal and unbelievable that they wouldn't be able to, at least some of the time. Most of us, I think, are aware of mass influences that give a sense of place or a sense of history. You had that feeling, you go into somewhere, let's, say a cathedral, and you can feel all this history and all this love and prayer and passion, and poetry and music that's gone in there. You can actually feel it, and there's still a lot of beings around. I am half Scottish, as you might guess from my name, and I know every time I go to Scotland, you wander through the Highlands, and I can tell you, you're surrounded by upset, weepy beings. That's what, that's Scotland's flagship thing. Is it's sad, the sadness of the glens, the history, the massacres. Best thing that ever happened to Scotland. I can't say this, but when the English moved and they said, stop fighting. If you want to fight, go and fight our enemies, never mind fighting each other. Gave us the British Army and conquered the world. But, they honestly, you do feel this sort of griefy, weeping. There's a glen called the Glen of Weeping, Glen Coe, and it still carries that sad sense of all those people that were massacred a couple of hundred years ago. Anyway, that's cloud consciousness. Now let's talk about primal consciousness. Remember, I took on as my first proposition of being that suppose consciousness came first. Well, an awful lot of things follow from that. For a start, it means that all matter, energy, and space and time was created by consciousness and is within consciousness, not the other way around. Listen, it's 100% total reason. I'm not forcing the proposition on you, but I'm forcing the deduction. If consciousness came first, then it must 100% certain be that matter, energy, space, and time is within consciousness. And of course, that's what, quantum physics and so on is waking us up to, basically. But the original consciousness that was there before anything was there, it sounds a bit like, what's his name? Aristotle's prime mover unmoved, doesn't it? I don't know if you've heard that expression. But they were pretty clever, these Greeks. They asked all the big questions like 2,500 years ago. Aristotle said, well, cause and effect, right? So if that caused that, what caused that? So that caused that, and that caused... He said, sooner or later, as you go back, I'll come to it one last time before we finish, but sooner or later, you get to something that started the sequence, and that he called prime mover unmoved. Anyway, primal consciousness is the preferred term. It's better than words like God. Not that there's anything wrong with the word God. It's a short, simple, easy to use word, or goddess. But it's so contentious. I mean, so many people are being killed because they don't believe in the right God, or they don't spell it the right way. So you're dead, bang, bang. It's really heartbreaking. I actually like the term highest spiritual abstraction. And it can be anything you like. It can be the Buddhist, the Brahman word is Hindu, but the Buddhists also believe that there was a material ground that was behind everything before anything was pasted onto this canvas. And I put a few words here like the creator or the great architect or divine parent, because I want you to notice that there's a tendency, a very strong tendency to anthropomorphize, in other words, turn whatever it is into a human. And I've got to be rude with some people and say I just found it a joke, the idea of a hairy old man up in the sky spying on you that hates women, clearly, and has anger management issues. What? Why would you be interested in such a being if there was one? Never mind worship it, come on. So really, I think this primal consciousness is more like a state than a being or identity. And that fits very well with the writings of Anita Moorjani. I think we all know Anita Moorjani, who came very close to death but survived. She wrote a book called Dying to Be Me, but she died in all medical senses, but then all of a sudden all her tumors disappeared overnight and she recovered. But she describes quite clearly the near-death experience of going out there, and I suppose a lot of other people do, but hers sticks in my mind. She says that God is really a state of being. It's not an entity or an identity. God is a state of being, and I've clung to that since I read her work, because that fits so well with what I know, what I think, and this model. Okay, so what use is all this? Let's see what we can do with it. Hearing voices. As I said, these are called auditory hallucinations, but that's a very bad term because it's pathologizing something that really isn't necessarily so, right? It's saying you're hallucinating. Like I said, I'd love to go around in the wards and say, no, you're not. If you can hear a voice, I'm sure you can. Do you think have it drop in with me and say a couple of words? I'd be interested to know what its point of view is. Anyway, here's a nice quote. Instead of being a list of symptoms with side effects on top, where people, this is a diagnosed person hearing voices, who hear voices and see visions, have unusual thoughts, passionate feelings, and intense experiences. Well, that doesn't sound like pathology to me. That sounds like something we could all do with. That very vivid kind of life they've got. Here's my point anyway, which is if you're hearing voices or you know somebody that is, or you're a practitioner or a therapist, as many people in FNB are, don't fall for this line, it's some kind of pathology. instead view these voices as beings. They're not hallucinations, they exist. So talk to them. They're scary. I mean, some of them are really scary. They're naughty. They come in on the person and say, I'm going to give you cancer, you're going to die. And they're really naughty with it. You die of a heart attack within a year. The first thing to say to the person is, don't buy all that crap, because they can't make you do anything or accept anything that you don't believe in. So you've got to believe in it if you're going to be sick or get cancer. As long as you resist that, it's not going to happen. But the important point is they're just sick. They're screwed up. They're messed up. Not the patient. The voices being talking like that. They're sick, and you've got to sort them out. I mean, just talk to them. Say. And you have your case, do it telepathically. If you want, it's a bit arrogant to talk direct. I always talk via the patient. I said, would you ask them, what the hell do you want? What do you actually want? Or questions like, what would make this situation easier? Is there something I can do for you that would be comforting? Use those natural, compassionate, humane kind of questions and approach, and you'll find you may get it a bit nasty at first, but as the days go by, sooner or later this person is going to wake up and say, well, that's all I ever want was, and they'll tell you, and they'll say, well, I can help, or I know somebody that can help. It can be very simple. A therapist phoned me up desperately one day. They got a young boy who was had this being that was making all these. I said, look, just tell him to ask it what it wants. I can't remember what the answer was. It's many years ago. And then I said, also ask it then, is there anything keeping you here? Do I need to delay you any further? Why not go off and get another life? And the visiting being just vanished like that. And the person was never troubled again. So it can be quick and easy. It can be a bit laborious, but the important point is they are living conscious beings. And if you talk to them, they respond. And in fact, I think I've got a slide on this. There's a whole movement. Oh, that's not the movement. Wait a minute. Hang on. No. All right, somehow I've missed it off the slide. I must have substituted something for something else. Anyway, the good news is that there is a movement called the Hearing Voices movement. It was founded by a couple of Dutch doctors, and they did pretty much, what I've been doing for 40 years, but they really got this going in about 2003, I think it was, where they encourage people to just talk to their voices, respond. You see, that medical science is saying, oh, you're screwed up, this hallucination, take this drug, we'll crush it all out, you won't hear anything, we'll try and save you. Oh, it must be terrifying. Instead of saying, well, what's the problem? It's just voices. Relax and have a conversation. These two wonderful, brilliant Dutch doctors brought that point of view forward, and it worked. It worked magically. So there's now a movement. I think there's Hearing Voices Movement USA.com. I'll come to some email addresses in a minute anyway. So there are other ways of doing this, by the way. I just listed a couple. I mean, if you want some big trouble, go and see the Scientologists. Their big secret that you have to be initiated and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars is that we're more than one being. But I wouldn't recommend that as a possible solution. But some workers, do work directly on this problem. And David St. Lawrence calls his spiritual rescue technology. You can go out and Google that. He'll sell you a couple of books. They're very simple, easy to read. But basically, his technique is to recruit them. Don't say, get out of here, never darken my psychic space again. He says, talk to them, say, well, all right, if you want to hang around, do, but what can you contribute? And it's amazing how many beings wake up to that. Say, oh, well, actually, I'm quite artistic. Shall we try some paintings? It's amazing what you get to when you're open-hearted and not frightened. There's another, oh gosh, you haven't mentioned exorcism, have I? But this is the great, I don't know how to put it in words, the Catholic Church's #1 recruitment. You remember that horrible movie, The Exorcist? It's really, the problem is created by the exorcists, basically, because they're going with the wrong premise that, this is the devil incarnate and it's evil visiting this person. No, it's not. It's just somebody who's lost their way, like it says here at the bottom. The conscious beings are just misunderstood, lost, confused, upset. they're not the devil, for goodness sake. But if you start rattling the cage and screaming devil, and you know, get out and here's some holy water, the whole thing goes pear-shaped and ugly very quickly. But I want to say that that's my point of view on that. You can think what you like, but I don't think that's a very positive approach at all. A better idea, I mentioned Samuel Sagan, the late Samuel Sagan, right at the beginning, you may not remember, but he started something called the clair vision, like clairvoyance. He's French, so it's a bit like clairvoyance, I suppose, which is a French word. Anyway, Clair Vision School, and it's clairvision.org. You can go over there and see what they do. I've got a couple of books by Samuel. One is about dealing with these, you know, difficult entities, and the other one is about past lives, which really almost, come on, that's another talk, but it almost follows as night follows day on the non-material mind model. Like I said, non-materiality doesn't mean, you know, not there and just fluffy spirit. It also means no matter, no energy, no space, no time. Therefore, it's timeless. Therefore, it doesn't die, it doesn't go away. I wouldn't worry about dying. I'd worry, what on earth am I going to do in the next few billion years without getting bored? Anyway, let's just wrap up with a couple of things. To me, it's elementary reason that matter, energy, space and time cannot be self-initiating. If any of you have a bit of trouble with that, well, you're back to the Big Bang model, which is proven over and over and over and over until it's sickening to be wrong. It's not just there's no evidence to prove it's right. There's mountains of evidence to prove it's wrong, that matter suddenly leapt into existence. Yeah, from what? As it says in The Sound of Music. There, yeah, see, not Mary Poppins, what's she called? Julie Andrews has it. She said, you can't get something from nothing. It's a song in there, but it's better than most modern physicists can do. And then this is back to Aristotle's prime mover, right? No matter how many steps backwards we go in physical causation, there's always a prior cause. You know, whatever you've got, however far back you go, there's always a prior cause. But sooner or later, you've got to step out of the physical into an initiating conscious intentionality. And that's really where things start. A big, I mean, that's what I could lecture for a whole year at Oxford University on that. That's a big one, but let's leave it at that for just now. So going back to, well, let me finish it up with panpsychism then, because it's a word you'll come across. It's a lovely concept. It's a bit like the philosophical model that used to be called animism. Animus is the old Latin word for spirit, and animism meant there's a mind in everything. But anyway, back to remember my proposition, my first proposition of being was that if consciousness is there first, then everything is within consciousness and not the other way around. Oh, I missed the word round out. The universe is within the mind. You know, the concept of the universe, by the way, there's a lovely quote. Gilbert Keith Chesterton, an English writer, said, oh, the cosmos is just about the smallest space into which you can squeeze the human mind. Think about it, it's brilliant. Oh, shoot, where have I gone? Oh, have I gone back to the beginning? No, I haven't. He's in the wrong book, that's why. Yeah, here we go. So, it means because stuff is inside consciousness, effectively it means that the whole of creation is conscious and alive. That's a lovely spiritual and empowering system of belief. But the thing is, it's a logical deduction. If the first premise is true, then without any ripple or hiccup in logic, it means that everything in creation is conscious and alive, shares in consciousness anyway. Even stones, rivers, planets, they've all got a degree of consciousness. Rupert Sheldrake, who we all know and love, ran a conference in, I think it was in Oxford somewhere a few years ago. But anyway, the theme of the conference was, is the sun conscious? And it was a very interesting proposition because, you know, we are, you know, using a brain that's a tiny little, you know, handbag full of nothing really, and yet we depend on this so much. There's a few neurons, a few million, a few billion with electrical activity, but there's the sun with an uncalculable number of squillions of grillions or whatever the words are of electrical particles. It's almost certainly conscious, I should think, and probably a lot smarter than we are. And that reminds one of the lovely pictures from the Egyptian paintings and hieroglyphs where they show pictures. Well, Akhenaten, you know, the guy that believed in Ra, the sun god, and they show the sun's rays coming. I can't show it, man, but the sun's rays coming down as fingers at the end, fingers touching and stroking the humans. I love it. Anyway, it's not about panpsychism. I just wanted to finish with that. That's it means mind in everything, or everything is conscious, if you like. Okay, I'm done. I'm going to questions in just a minute, but if you want to contact me, please do. I'd love to get emails. keith.scottmumby@gmail.com. That's my main one. I have a huge free website, alternative-doctor.com. And if you have a mind to join me in the woo-woo and the funnies, I've got quite a number of websites, but one is called Scriptures in the Making, meaning, you know, the 2,500 years old stuff. It's getting a bit yellowed and worn around the edges. You know, it was written by people who never seen a telephone, a motor car, a computer. They didn't have toilet paper. They didn't see airplane. You know, what can they tell us, really? So I think we need some new scriptures. So it's a bit arrogant, but yes. So I'll leave those contact details up while I now take questions. Over to you, Judy. What have we got?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I love this idea of scriptures in the making. For many years, I've been talking about, and I know a lot of people are talking, we need new myths, right? We need new myths that inform how we are in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And so I'm going to check that site out for sure. Jerry has raised his hand. Let me just let him speak. Hold on one second, if I can find him. Jerry, do you have?
Hi, Jerry.
Yeah. Hi, Keith. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, you're fine.
Okay. I loved your talk. It was
Thank you.
absolutely amazing, and I agree with the various concepts that you stated. But I'm heavy into the concept of I am, and in part of the concept of I am is that I am my characters. So who are we? I am my characters. The other concept of I am is I am thoughts. I am my thoughts. I am thoughts within thoughts within thoughts within thoughts, etc. And that's one of the affirmations to get you into who you are. So it coincides with exactly what you're stating. And then the other thing that FMBR is heavy into is the oneness. And that's what you did on your last slide. We are all one. And that's part of the raw contact L&L research, that channeling material. What they are is the social memory complex.
I made a conscious decision, Jerry, to miss out. You know, I should have made it floor 7, and then floor 8 would be the divine or primal consciousness. But just back to what you said about the self, I teach a meditation now. You can throw it away. I was going to say it's a free country. No, it isn't, but it was. But you can throw it away. But I give people a meditation. I am not my thoughts. I have emotions, but I'm not my emotions. I have beliefs, but I am not my beliefs. Until a person can really disconnect and see that they're a spiritual being that has all this, you know, awareness and perception and beliefs and so on, but it's not actually their thoughts. Now, that's what I believe. So we're just going to be different. But I didn't at any stage say you're not your executive self. You know, you're still Jerry Chin in the saddle, no matter how many of these other things are flocking around you. Because, I mean, you're a pretty juicy target, I think. You're a very, very smart guy. They'd love to be part of your ecosystem. So I'm not saying the executive self is invalid, but...
well, ultimately, you're I am, and that's... and it's a conglomerate of all your thoughts throughout all your incarnations, etc. So it's in a certain sense is similar, but different from the way you're stating it. So, but I enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Maybe a semantic thing, you know. But if somebody says, you know, another thing I teach, if somebody says, I am angry. I said, what do you mean you're angry? You're a person. Anger is an emotion that you may or may not experience. But to say you are anger doesn't make any semantic sense. Anyway, listen, Jerry, next time I'm down your way, we'll share a glass of wine. We can talk for hours about this one. It's a big subject, isn't it? Very passionate. And there's nothing wrong with what you say. It's just semantically, I'd put some of this in slightly different terms.
Right.
Okay. So lots of love anyway. Thanks for asking.
You. Thanks, Jerry. And Alan had his hand up, so I'm going to let Alan, you can unmute yourself. Sorry. Hold on. Alan, if you can unmute yourself. Let's see.
If it's going to be a problem, get Alan to type it in the chat and we'll move on. I still want to deal with the question, Alan, but there's a certain amount of time after which.
So let's see.
Wait. So type your question in the chat and we'll move on with it.
Yeah, and then Francisca, you can go ahead and talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Francisca.
Yes, hi, Francisca.
Hi. I wanted to know, I know a lot of the people that you mentioned, so that was quite interesting. I wanted to know how your view about life actually affects your life. Let's say, how would you be living in some areas in your life if you thought differently? And what does this way of thinking that we are a multitude of personalities, it connects with something that I saw some time ago. I think it was an art exhibit actually, that actually that we are actually, physically, we are communities of bacteria and all sorts. So in that way, we're not one consciousness, but a conglomeration of many consciousnesses.
Yes, that speaks to the oneness thing that Jerry brought up. Now, I'm not against that idea. That would be higher. There's the primal consciousness is the sort of godlike whatever, and then there are lower levels of that. There are sayings in almost all religions. To find God, you have to die, which I think means give up the self, and you have to rejoin the community up top there, as it were. That's how I interpret it to mean. Anyway.
So yes,
we're connected in ever so many ways with ever so many things. I just concentrated on human entities.
Yeah, okay. But when you say, because there are, many people that are religious. I know, for instance, the Course of Miracles. It's I don't know if you heard about that one.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So they say the same thing that you said. Now you're not the I. So is that what you're talking about? Because I felt that what you were talking about was a bit more than that. It was more about the many personalities. Because I always thought that people who were mentally supposed to be schizophrenic, actually, my idea was that they actually have some kind of shamanic attributes to them, but it's just not directed. For instance.
Yes. Well, a person can find themselves, confused and in difficulties with this. Something I didn't say, but I don't encourage people to go looking out for entities and connect with them. Some people think it's clever, smarty aleck. Some people have no choice. It comes in on them. But really, I think I spend, and my cohorts and the people in my ecosystem would spend more time trying to discourage people from doing it, to try and close down so that you're not being hammered with all these messages. That's really what the Hearing Voices movement's about. So I'm saying, by all means, be compassionate and tolerant. It's a much better way to get them off your back. But, we don't want, for example, some of these beings around us are very prescient, and they urge us with stories, don't do that, you're going to die, and so on. And some psychics and gifted people and prescients get terrified. They just see so much, they can't function. They have to close it down. It's just terrifying. I'm sure there's at least one person on the call right now, but that would admit that they've had an experience. It really got just too much for them, and found it difficult to handle, and had to sort of back off. So I think overall, I'm trying to say it's not good. It happens, they're out there, but I can't encourage people to go out gather up a cloud of beings. It's not going to do you
No,
any.
no,
It's
it's
not
not.
going to do them any good.
Yeah, it's not what I meant either. I was just
Yeah.
pointing at that. I agree with you on the fact that we are multifaceted and not just one personality and things like that. I think a lot of us are closed psychically. I think a lot of people have potential to be more psychic, but really don't want to see things.
Well,
Yeah,
it's encouraged out of us, isn't it? Almost beaten out of us as kids. You're told that's stupid, ridiculous.
yeah,
Until the child shuts down. I mean, what's more gifted and psychic than a child? They can look over in the corner and see a little animal and they want to go and pet Freddie. It's there for them. Freddie's there. The adult says, oh, that's just a hallucination. That's stupid. So children are very gifted, but it's hammered out of them by about 7 or 8 years old. Anyway, I don't feel I've got enough time, Francisca, to share my life and how I do things. But let's just say I consider it an enlightened view that opens me to be kind and compassionate in many situations where a more didactic point of view would probably be cruel and unsupportive. Would that do? Yeah?
Yeah, that would do, definitely. Thank you.
All right, thank you then.
Thank you, Francesca. Alan, do you want, you have to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
Do you know how to unmute, Alan? You hover at the bottom and you'll see a row of icons. The extreme left one is a microphone. That's where you unmute.
Okay, and in the meantime, let me ask you a question from Bruce.
Yes. Hi, Bruce.
You to comment. He's a physician and a chaplain in the hospital. He said he has 2 observations from the bedside. Who we are is each other. The pronoun I is a plural.
Well, all right. I've never heard it put that way, but if we stumble on anything tonight, friends, it's just going to be semantics, just getting the words right or understanding what your words mean versus. But I is a plural. I love that. I'm going to steal that, Bruce, if that's okay.
Bruce is very wise. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Kathleen wants to speak. If you go ahead and unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
I seem to have missed level 6.
Oh, on the slide, there was a right. The slide 7 was the
Let's
highest spiritual extraction.
Right. So, yeah. Right. Oh, I'm actually. I think you're right, because I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I did this. Crikey! Let me go back and do it. It's short. It's obvious. I mean, I could just read it, but there is this, and I did refer to it. And I said this is a layer where we are all joined, and it's just below divinity, and then we separate out from below that. It's got all sorts of names, hasn't it? Like big mind or one mind, higher power, whatever you want to call it. But this is the big level of connectivity and knowing and transpersonal psychology. Even the Akashic records, so-called, maybe at this level. There's something up there that's for all of us, and we're all connected. In I'm really cross, Judy. I don't know how. I've got a feeling I might have missed another slide out, so I do apologize. Anyway, the cloud consciousness, the multiple beings, is number 5, and the 6th floor was higher self, big mind or one mind, and then the 7th floor was primal consciousness. Okay. I hope that's
good.
You're right. Absolutely right. Is that sufficient answer, sweet?
Yes,
Missed it. I've now put it back. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for pointing out the problem. Right. Let's move on. Oh, that's where I wanted to go there. Yeah. Okay. Judy, back to you.
And Alan, if I'm going to give you one more chance, if you can unmute yourself. If you want to unmute yourself, just sort of jump in there, and if not, I'll ask a question too about, we had a few months ago, we had E.M. Nicolay talking, and one of the things he talked about was, multiple lives, past lives, right? But he talked about concurrent lives, your own consciousness being embodied in in this reality, in this kind of 3D time space continuum. What do you think of that?
I'm not quite sure I understand. Just put it in slightly different words, Judy. I mean, I accept past lives. I can remember lots.
Yeah.
Not an issue for me, but
he talked about. Well, I mean, it's very complex, of course, but you think about past lives, and you can go back and you can do healing in past lives, shamanically. But he also talked about concurrent lives, that we're living concurrently. Our consciousness in different ways.
I mean, on the face of it, that's the question. Can we be 2 people at once or 5 people at once?
Right.
It's not a model I'm familiar with. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be possible, but I don't think for most beings it would be a very workable choice.
I think it would be.
It's tough enough being an I without being 5.
Right. Good. Okay. So, Kathleen, I don't know if you raised your hand again, or you can.
No, she took it down now, I think. So.
Oh, she took it down. Okay. And we're not hearing from Alan, and so I apologize, Alan. We can't hear you. If you have a question, and I think that is the last of the questions. Lots of thanks coming in, and
I'm glad they enjoyed it. What about Q&A? People are not using the Q&A, are they?
not as much as usual.
Yeah, chat. I think chat's preferred.
I think so. I think it's nice to have a conversation.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, really rich, and I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time, I think.
I loved giving it. I love being here, and I love all these responses. I mean, it's just togetherness in the best sense. And you listen, all you guys realize I'm a bit of a wacky doctor. I'm not, but that's my strong suit. So I just do what I do.
You're in the right place with us, right? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And oh yeah, so Francis says she'll look you up online.
All right.
So if you want to contact Dr. Mumby, his contact information is there. So thank you again. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening. We'll see you next time.